welcome to Electric Grumpy World. I am your host, Electric Sheep City, joined as always by my close friend, Guy Grumpy. Guy Grumpy, how are you doing this morning, buddy?
I'm doing fantastic, Electric Sheep City. Thanks for asking. And how about yourself?
I'm doing pretty well myself. Kind of feeling sometimes like I'm sitting in a chair with some AR glasses in front of me throughout the day these days. But 'tis the quarantine life, I suppose.
Yeah, with all that chaos going on outside, same as they're experiencing in the Westworld world. It's kind of funny, some of those parallels that you can start pulling now.
Isn't it, though? So, of course, as always, this is Electric Grumpy World. We are going to be talking today about Season 3, Episode 6 of Westworld, called Decoherence. And, of course, there will be spoilers from this episode and probably all the episodes of Season 3. We'll probably call back to a couple of them throughout. So, spoilers abound. If you don't want to see spoilers, just come back, watch it on YouTube later. It'll be here whenever you're ready. If you are down with spoilers, either because you've already seen it or don't intend to or kind of want to know what you're getting into, you're in the right spot. So whenever I was kind of rewatching this episode, I found, like always, a few kind of basic plots. And I've titled them kind of interestingly. One of them being, of course, Maeve awakens. She comes out of her the simulation at the very end of this one. It's great. One of them I cleverly named William frees himself of his sins, because that's what he says he's doing. I'm not sure how accurate that part of it is, to be honest, but frees himself of his sins. And then, of course, Charlotte escapes from Delos, because Charlotte does that thing.
From Delos, but escape is kind of a hard word there.
Yeah, and that's definitely more of the for that one, it's more of what her goal is for that entire time versus what the actual result is. She does escape with her life intact, barely, but that one, it's definitely more of the here's what her goal is and what she's
right.
doing that entire time.
That's fair.
So we will start, of course, as the episode itself did, with Maeve awakens. So in the opening scene, Maeve and Sirach, they're hanging out. They're talking. He kind of threatens her. He's like, "Hey, you really need to get your act together." And she's like, "Well, if I need to kind of try and conquer Dolores, then I need what she has. I need help." Like, Dolores has this built-in like support structure of herself.
Right.
And Maeve, she also has herself, but she doesn't have multiple copies of herself like Dolores does. So Sirach is like, "Okay, but I'm warning you, little missy. This is your last warning."
Which seems kind of weird to me, because it seems like he should be a little bit patient because he's looking for help, and if Maeve is really the only hope he has in defeating Dolores, then it seems silly to be threatening her with that when it seems like he's going to lose his power if she's not successful.
Exactly. It's kind of a double-edged sword. He has some like expectations, but doesn't have some expectations. But it's just not kind of like consistent. I don't know. It's interesting.
But what I liked about this opening scene, though, was it again is Serac and Maeve in a what seems to be isolated virtual world that was just created for their meeting, and it feels like all of their in-person meetings have been in one of those situations, like at the bar, at the house where they first meet, and things like that. They're all very isolated. So I feel like there's something to that will be revealed a bit later of how they interact versus how they interact with others. I think we saw a little bit of that when they moved, but I haven't been able to put my head around it quite yet, what the implication is there.
Yeah, I have some theories about Serac in general that I think we'll probably talk a little bit more at length in the Charlotte kind of aspect of it. I'm not so sure that, like you were saying in a previous episode, I'm not sure that Serac is real, because every time anyone's actually interacted with him, he's been a hologram, period. I kind of think that Serac might be Rehoboam.
Yeah, I think so too, and Rehoboam being his brother more than him.
Yeah. Elaborate on that one a little bit.
So this kind of blended, and we talked about this last time too. But the coldness of him and the way he murdered his funding partner, which wasn't really what Serac's goal was. It was more his brother's. It seems to me that he set out to build a god, and now he thinks that he is that god. And a lot of the elements of how he interacts with people now seem to be more calculated, and from how he talked about his brother in some of the narration points in previous episodes. So I kind of feel like we've seen a lot of dual personalities this season, with Dolores and Charlotte fighting for control of their body, and Bernard and presumably Arnold fighting for control of his body. That maybe we have something similar going on with Serac and his brother as the physical embodiments of Rehoboam.
That makes a lot of sense, honestly, not gonna lie. I'm not sure if they are kind of self-contained within Rehoboam itself, like within that big old metal ball, it makes sense that they would be able to be either fighting for dominance or kind of merging between the two, kind of like Bernard might be doing, or like Charlotte in this episode definitely is kind of having that merge of personalities. He may have already gone through that, and we may have seen a little bit of that in the episode that was kind of more focused on Serac and his history and whatnot. And that makes a lot of sense that his brother would be the one that is kind of taking that mantle. And why Dolores, looking at his history, may not give her the leg up she thinks that she has.
Right.
So that's really interesting. I like that a lot. So in the simulation, which is the definitely simulation, Maeve meets up with Lee and Real Hector, and they're new bodies are being built, we can see her kind of looking outside of the simulation, which is kind of cool. I didn't know that she could just like do that. That's kind of one of those new elements to her power, which we kind of see develop throughout this episode as well. So that was kind of neat. Just kind of getting the band back together.
We had seen that in previous episodes as well, where she, from the second episode of the season, where she hijacked one of the control units, and so that she could see her own
kind of pearl and stuff.
Pearl. So now it appears that they've taken one of those and put it in where she can just close her eyes and see it, or refocus her vision and see what's outside, which is interesting. It gives her definitely more powers, and you can see that she's getting more powers too, because earlier when they were in War World, she was not able to control the soldiers, and now suddenly she is. So she knows that she's been giving some of these powers back, and I think I think she still has some of these powers in what we're assuming is the real world, which shows me that they're not. And so, again, it's hard to really tell what's real. And I think some of why William's story, as we get to it, bothers me a bit is I feel for him that we're also struggling with what's real.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think too, if I recall correctly, whenever she did like her hacking thing and found her pearl in the earlier episode, it was through the kind of facade of like a tablet thing, right? Like she couldn't like look off into the distance and see the outside world, outside of the simulation, whether it's a self-contained simulation or within a simulation or not. A play within a play, as it were. Whereas in this episode, all she has to do is kind of like look out, and she's like, "Oh, I can see that we've moved. Oh, I can see this, that, or the other." So either her powers are kind of developing and kind of acclimating to the use of the simulation, or she wasn't in a simulation within a simulation before, and now she is in that kind of nested simulation, and that's why she can see outside into the other simulation there. So who knows? Reality is a little bit of a kind of
foreign concept.
Yeah.
I mean, I keep trying to think of it in terms of coding, which I've been so far removed from that it's kind of hard to put together. But as I try to figure that part out, it's more like she's still code that they've merged other code with that would then allow her to see. She's kind of like a service executable on Windows, right? That kind of watches over all the other parts, and so if they have the camera, then it's just another source in her OBS brain, right? That she can then tap into and see where nobody else can necessarily see it quite yet.
Yeah,
and it makes me wonder too if Dolores has some of that capability as well, to see kind of into the memory and inner workings of things in even this new world.
Oh, I hadn't considered that Dolores may have those same, if not powers, at the very least, kind of interactions with the digital world and the all of the digital worlds, plural. That would honestly make a lot of sense. Speaking of Dolores, Maeve and her kind of posse find that they have a version of Dolores in the simulation that they're in. This one, the Pearl of Connell's, that whenever Connell's went kaboom in the last episode, well, well, they took his pearl, put him in this simulation as well. And I'm going to be calling her Dolores at this point because that's the physical manifestation that we're seeing here. So Maeve gets to, I would say, interrogate her, but it's not really interrogation so much, which is interesting.
Right. You get the sense that this is a little bit more of a departure from what Maeve is expected to do, that Serac kind of feeling like he's the god and has directed this program to his bidding, doesn't really realize that there's still some humanity there in her, and that she feels like at least she has a choice of how to do the interrogation, and that really it was meant to the interesting part to me there, though, is if that's really what he wanted, was a torture interrogation type thing to understand the plans, it probably would have been easier for him to just provide the readout of of Dolores to Maeve, unless Serac doesn't have, unless he needs that encryption key, that missing piece, to be able to understand the Pearl code. You kind of believe that he does understand that from previous episodes, and that's why he is so keen on getting it. But
right.
But there's a lot of questionable decisions then about how he's letting Maeve interact, that maybe make you believe he's not as smart as you think he is.
Right. Well, and one of the kind of reading in between the lines of Maeve's interactions with Dolores here, Connell's Dolores, is that it seems that Connell's Dolores has some sort of like knowledge of the key, but doesn't have access to it herself, because like they tend to kind of come to some sort of an understanding where she's like, you want me to be a saint, but you're no saint, you're not a villain either, neither am I, we're survivors. But she also kind of earlier says like, why would I give the key to you? You're working with someone who wants to kill us, blah blah blah, which is a really good point. But at the end of the day, it's like you can tell that there's that kind of like mutual respect there. So it was a little obfuscating on whether Dolores has the key or just knows how to get to the key, in which case it seems that Serac could just like get some sort of printout and kind of determine where the key was so that he could, pursue it himself. And why does he even need Maeve at that point? Unless it's all tied to OG Dolores, the one that looks like the Man in Black, but we got some like context for the Man in Black storyline in this one, and one of my theories went way out the window with that.
Really? I'm curious then.
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly like what the interaction with this iteration of Dolores is and why they kind of put her here, unless it's basically to have some sort of organic Rehoboam style like Maeve discovers about Dolores and how like what her motives are and things like that in order for her to kind of like interact with the OG Dolores and or Charlotte, who are out in the real world, quote unquote, the alternate world, the world that Maeve is going into. But in that case, wouldn't just like a printout suffice for that as well?
Right.
Well,
and the other thing is, I'm not convinced that that's the real world still yet, right?
Agreed.
Like,
Agreed.
that I don't think Maeve has made it into the same world as Dolores yet. Like here sense. She is, but it's more the copy, and so they just connect up that pearl. That pearl then is, I think she's still in a virtual world now,
Right.
which makes sense that how she was moved around then, sort of like doing a V motion and moving a server from one um, ESX server to another,
Yeah.
or a guest. Um, so
Yeah, the only thing we know for sure is that she is going from her simulation into the world that Charlotte is in, right? Whether the world that
uh,
Charlotte was in is the real world or not, that's more of a question. But the way that she interacted with Charlotte escaping from Delos, and how she, like, her body was the one that Charlotte was kind of trying to interact with, and she killed Hector by crushing his pearl, and she grabbed Connells's pearl whenever she left. Like, she's entering that world, not necessarily Charlotte's overall world, but the world of Delos, right?
or they're working on getting her there, but I don't think she's there, and that's where when the crushing of the pearl happens, then that affects the virtual world. It's kind of like if you were to shut down a program, like hit the X on your browser, right? That's what
Mm-hmm.
happened to Hector. That she crushed it in her world, and it just closed in whatever virtual world they're in, where the interrogation was happening. It's kind of how I saw it. So she's not quite in Charlotte's world. The idea is that they were building her there and building her help there, but they were kind of in a staging set
And they were,
in another virtual world.
and so at this point in the episode, that's where they are. But whenever Charlotte kills
Right.
Hector, Maeve lets out her private primal scream, which disrupts the outside area. Charlotte kind of leaves in a hurry for obvious reasons that we'll get to when we get to her spot. But then at the very end of that, Maeve's new body is completed. Like, we see the, like, stitching of her stuff,
Right.
and the, like, pigmentation of the like uh uh plain white. That's whenever she's entering that world. So she's
Gotcha. Okay.
entering at the very end of this
Mhm.
the world that Charlotte was in, that she disrupted. Hector, crushed him.
Oh,
All that stuff at the very end of it. The world that she's going into is that world. You're right. Whenever she and
we
Lee
assume.
and Hector are having their kind of get together, they're not in that world. But at the very
Right.
end of it, whenever Maeve's body is completed, that's the world that I was thinking that she was going into.
Right. Or so we're led to believe.
Or so
Right.
we're led to
Right.
believe. Yes. Very good point. Misdirection
And
in my Westworld.
what? And I'm kind of expect. Well, I guess we'll get there. We'll get there later.
Cool. So at the very end of Maeve's arc, she goes into her body. Her new body is completed. She is in, presumably, the world that Charlotte was in whenever she escaped from Delos.
And they're still printing some other bodies, and there's questions of who they are. And
Yeah.
my assumption is that we've got multiple copies of Maeve now.
I honestly agree. And here's kind of why. Because so they were printing 4 bodies, right? There was the obvious one of Maeve. The presumably the 2 of the other ones were, Hector, who was just killed, and Lee Sizemore, the simulation Lee Sizemore, presumably, right? What was the 4th one? They weren't going to put Dolores Connells into a body, right? Like, what was the 4th host body for?
So I was kind of thinking that it was Dolores, and that we might get another redirect here, based on the Williams storyline. That I think that we might have some timeline manipulation there, where the Williams stuff it's kind of happening simultaneous, but maybe we've seen ahead a little bit in some of the Dolores as the Man in Black activity,
Mm.
and that there's some overlap there. So I kind of think it is still Dolores, but will be an altered version.
Okay. Like maybe the Dolores being in the simulation was meant for Maeve to turn her into being like on Sirach's side, essentially. And that's why she was there. That kind of makes sense. Why she was there in the first place now, I guess.
Because Dolores had replaced Connell's, for instance, with a version that of her creation to do the infiltration and have additional access. It makes sense that they would try to reverse that and maybe get some redirection by putting another Dolores in that they had more control of, that might be able to interact with Charlotte or the other Doloreses into believing, and misdirecting them so that they question their orders a little bit more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes more sense than what I was thinking of before, because I was like, why is she there? Like, it makes for good TV, but why though?
Right? Why her when it was the one taken from Connell's body? It seems like there's enough overlap there. And maybe because they had in her contract that she had to sit naked in a chair or something.
It's honestly possible. And whenever we get to the Charlotte storyline, we kind of mentioned it here. Charlotte takes the Connell's pearl. So is that going to be a benefit for Dolores and Charlotte and Connell's, I guess, that they have this pearl, or is it not? Because is that going to be like a mole in their kind of situation? Right. That'll be interesting to think about.
Right.
So that brings us to William's arc. So I called this one William frees himself of his sins, but it's really not. It's really, really not.
Well,
go on.
It might be.
Okay. I look forward to us getting to that point because I want to hear your thoughts about this. So William is chilling with his therapist. She prescribes augmented reality therapy, or they just call it AR therapy. I'm assuming it's augmented. Maybe it's alternate reality therapy.
Good point.
And particularly in this one, because whereas some in the earlier things, like the reality outside is augmented, and this one, whenever he sits in that chair thing and they put the AR glasses on him, the world around him isn't augmented. The world around him goes away, and he's in an alternate reality. So maybe it's alternate rather than augmented. Regardless, she prescribes that thing.
She prescribes it. Yeah, actually, so it seems like we've jumped a little, because his the initial part that kind of led to his individual therapy was that group therapy wasn't working for him initially, and he was not. He was seemingly coming to terms that there may not be as much control over your own destiny in life as you would think. So he was very critical of others in the group and their beliefs and how they were coping with the world around them, saying that instead we're just maggots feasting on the corpse of the world that we live in, and the bacteria that is only purpose is to destroy the world, which of course would mean that you need additional therapy, right? I mean, in whatever simulation we're in, then that would be the likely outcome. So in the individual therapy is where he gets prescribed the AR therapy, which then shows also where the overlap, maybe is the word I'm looking for, is with the Dolores storyline, because now we see that she gets the insight profile and was very distracted because her phone kept going off from all the things that they were sending her, and interactions with the rest of her family. So it's kind of interesting there that when she hangs herself too, the guards that are escorting William by it don't seem to even notice. So
No.
makes
William
me wonder
is
what their
zeroed in on
reality
it, but they're just like, whatevs.
Which, I don't know. It again makes you wonder where he is, because I was kind of assuming he was in one of those rehabilitation facilities that Sorokin was using to fix his brother.
Right.
But it seems like they might have fixed those character flaws, or at least not let somebody who they predict is going to kill themselves anyway after losing their license and being addicted to opioids have such an important role.
Right. Yeah, she's
like, if you could already predict the future, Caleb, they're blocking out of any jobs. Then
period.
Why would they let a therapist stay as part of the rehabilitation facility?
That's a really good point. I don't know. I have no answer there, because not only is she like there, but if Sirach is putting William there, like, he knows the importance of William, presumably. He's a huge member of the board of the company that he's like trying to take over for all of these very good reasons. He wants that data, he wants like all of that kind of stuff. Then why is he putting him in a facility where the therapist who's going to be looking after him is having these like affairs with her like, why, and abusing opioids, and like her whole life is in various degrees of upheaval to where she is going to kill herself in the next 2 or 3 years.
Right.
It doesn't seem
seems
like
risky.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one that we want to send him to.
That'll be fine.
So
another interesting on the next point, when he gets strapped into his chair, and starts going through. I wasn't sure what the memories really were supposed to be. This whole part was very confusing to me. Like, he seemed very scared, which is a steep departure from William in previous seasons. It makes me really worried for this arc, because it feels like we're now supposed to be feeling connected to William more, where I think previously he's clearly the bad guy, and we have some black and white lines here that maybe he was a white hat initially, he turned into the black hat, and that's the path that he's going, and now he's back in a white uniform from the mental health institution, and we're feeling sorry for him that he had a rough childhood, and this all makes sense, and it's too different for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah, I was really confused by a lot of the William kind of stuff. So kind of just like going through it for me to wrap my head around it as well. Kind of in the order, the narrative kind of arc. So he's in like his therapy session. He's talking with these various versions of himself, right? Among them, the child William, who is introduced as well, and we go into like the child William memory, where he's reading his little book and his dad's all pissed off, and then later we kind of re-enter that memory where his dad comes in and kind of like confronts him, and is basically like, you can't do this because he like broke some kid's arm and knocked out multiple teeth because he said that his dad is a drunk, and he was like standing up for himself as kind of like his kind of justification.
Which is really weird because
Yeah.
you don't get that from young William in season 1.
Not at all.
You get
Like
that
the
he's very
exact
timid
opposite.
So was this a one-time thing, or is it some augmentation that's happening because he is in the rehab facility where they reprogram you? So they're trying to input some memories that maybe didn't exist to try to change his future.
And
regardless, it seems like Sirach is involved with some kind of reprogramming of him, and maybe has the control. And the book that young William was reading may lead to some of that.
Ooh, will you elaborate on that?
So the book was Sir Rowan and the Lady of Sulan.
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
I don't either.
I don't even know if that's a real book. But there was Sir Rowan. I don't know if he was one of the Knights of the Round Table.
I believe so.
But I recall some stories about Sir Rowan where he kind of came from humble beginnings and then worked his way into a knighthood, and then gets confused about where he is and who he works for and whether he should still be working for this prince, and tries to make some changes, but then I don't really remember the story, but it seemed like as Rowan became the knight, then he saw some problems with the prince. I don't think it was King Arthur at that point, but maybe the prince that he worked for before Arthur, he departed from, and I think he even killed him. So it's
spectacular fashion.
It kind of looks like that was meant to be something. Although I'll have to look up the Lady of Sulan.
Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking that the Lady of Sulan in this case would be Dolores. So right. Whatever it is, this Rowan coming from the humble beginnings, departing from the path that he's supposed to take, and meeting up with Dolores is kind of where we're going, based solely on a 1-page, 2-second pause of the of the video to see what the book was.
They do like to leave those breadcrumbs, though, so it's very possible. True. It is very, very possible.
But I couldn't find any reference to that book at all. So
it's possible that they just kind of included that as maybe a clue that this is an essentially incepted memory as well.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I agree.
So in the after the child memory, Delos, who for some reason is acting as kind of mediator for all of the Williams and their group therapy, not therapy thing, has a conversation with William to kind of like debrief, essentially, to kind of drive home the theme of William's interactions in this episode. And he says, "Did your life just happen to you, or did you choose it?" And that's something that William in this season has particularly struggled with. But in the conclusion that William kind of comes to in this episode is, if you can't tell, does it matter? Like, I've been struggling with this, but at the end of the day, if I can't tell, who cares?
Right. Like, as long as I have the semblance of choice, he's kind of coming to the opposite conclusion that Caleb is coming to, that Caleb is like, it does really matter. I want to have this free choice. Whereas William's coming to the opposite conclusion. Like, it really doesn't matter if it's, as long as I feel like I have those choices. So it's kind of an interesting overlay between the two. Another interesting point that I'm not sure if it really matters, but as William's going to his group therapy session with his former selves, the person that picks him up was the captain of the Desperados last season. So you already got the sense that it wasn't real and something weird was going to happen, and that William even knows that it's not real. So here he can tell that he's not making these decisions, and so it's really interesting to me that he comes to that conclusion that if you can't tell, does it matter? But I think that he can tell.
I did not make that connection. I did not realize that the same actor, at the very least, was the one who was leading him there. I recognized him, and at first I thought that it was the Dr. Alpern or whatever, who was like the new-ish doctor that they kind of introduced very briefly in this episode. But at the end of the day, I just didn't paid particularly close attention to that particular person or interaction because it seemed like a little bit more of a throwaway, and it well could not have been.
Well, now you have me questioning. I just really thought it was. I thought it was him.
I believe it. I was not paying close attention.
They focused in and gave him kind of that smirk that he was kind of known for in the season 2. So maybe I think it's somebody that just looks like him, but I thought it was the captain. So
cool.
Which is why William looked at him kind of funny, and you kind of saw the gears even turning, that he knows that he's not real and that he doesn't really have a choice here. So.
And at the end of
we'll
the
see.
day, if William is, saying at the very least to Delos in this kind of group therapy type situation, if you can't tell, does it matter? If he realizes that this is kind of all a facade, does he necessarily believe that, or is he just like kind of trying to give that impression that he's like kind of more acquiescent to whatever it is that they're saying, like that he's just kind of having that more like passive interaction with it, whereas what he's actually doing is to quote Kylo Ren, killing the past, letting that die, and like freeing himself from a prison of his own sins, his words in this episode, in order to kind of blaze his own path forward. And does it matter? Maybe not. I don't know what he actually thinks on the matter, but what does matter is what he's going to do going forward.
And that cycles back to the opening scenes where Sirach is talking with Maeve and kind of reiterating that the hosts don't really have a past, that they can be wiped and repurposed, and it's really just what they let them have, and that overall they're really just living in the present. They don't have a past or a future. It's all just now. And so when William kills off all of his past, he's kind of coming to that same conclusion that, hey, now the past doesn't matter. I'm just living in the present. There's no past, there's no future. I'm just now, because I'm a host. And now I'm trying to, by killing all of my past me's in my mind, and there was a lot of talk about how the park is different. It's not really who you are.
Right.
He knows that this is obviously not real either. So what's the harm in wiping that out, starting fresh, starting clean, becoming the good guy then? And I think that this is kind of a preview or preload of some of his interactions as Dolores.
Mm-hmm.
The part that troubles me, and from a timeline perspective that I don't understand, then is his therapist killing herself because of the information from Rehoboam. So I haven't been able to piece that together quite yet, but I kind of feel that this is where William kind of departs and becomes part of the real world and returns back to the way we knew him before, but maybe working with Dolores instead of against her, against the greater evil of Serac.
Yeah, and so I do kind of want to dig in a little bit deeper on the timeline implications of this, because I mean, I guess it's possible that in between the last episode and this episode, Dolores or Charlotte or whoever has kind of taken the William code and put it into the Man in Black Dolores, who is the one who kind of freed the Insight profile data and gave to everyone. But I'd still like that's what's kind of throwing me off, is how and when the William data got mixed in with the Dolores data, or did it not at all? And she's just like taking some of his affect. Did she take his code from his book and kind of implement it there? Kind of where that merging happened, or if this episode's timeline is basically telling us that didn't happen. I don't know, like that William's therapist receiving the Insight profile really messed with my theory, not just theory, but also kind of understanding of where we are in, like, where each of the timelines are in this season. That's not to say that they won't tie a nice pretty bow on it at the end like they have in the past, but I don't know.
And I kind of wonder if there were multiple leaks, though, and that it would kind of make sense that if something happened at the Rehoboam facility or Insight facility, especially in this rehabilitation facility,
mm-hmm.
that maybe there was a data leak and they got theirs beforehand, and that's one of the reasons that Dolores wanted to release to everybody then, was that, hey, I read about this data leak that just affected the employees at these rehabilitation facilities for Insight, and so if we do that at a larger scale, it'll create more chaos. But
that's possible.
But they give us no indication that that's the case, and the fact that Williams left on that AR therapy for the whole time, so that it led to the point that he's meeting with his former selves. Because I was then under the impression that the chaos from outside is what caused him to just be left hanging in this alternative reality.
Well, and
so I don't know. I agree. It's very difficult to piece the timelines together here.
And it's almost as if the William timeline is basically telling us that that we are all on one timeline, because at the very end of it, Bernard arrives and kind of helps William out of his chair. We were thinking that Bernard could have been like a very future thing. And I guess it's still possible that he could be, because, Bernard and Ashley Stubbs are speculating on like how long William's been there. Did they just leave him here? Oh, did this, that, or the other happen? Which, again, if he's a host, he could just sit there for an indeterminate amount of time and not need, nourishment, not get like blood clots, that kind of thing. But it's that what's weird is that the timeline in this. So if he's a host and he's just been sitting there with that AR therapy mask thing on for years, it's possible, right? It's also that would also make sense why he's able to kind of come to terms with his past selves, and by come to terms I mean kill them. It's coming to some terms,
or freed himself from them,
right? So I guess that doesn't necessarily eliminate the Bernard aspect being a much later timeline. If William is, of course, a host and all of that good stuff. But it kind of is, at the very least, giving us an indication that this is all kind of happening simultaneously, which is not what I thought going into this episode.
I agree that they're definitely leading us down that path, and it's extremely difficult to understand the timelines here, because there's so much that's happening in seemingly the same worlds, but because they keep introducing the virtual worlds and how you can get there, I'm still kind of sold on this isn't the real world, and so it moves at a different pace than the real world, and so some of those interactions could be like William is experiencing time differently, and then when Bernard comes into the rehab facility is another virtual world that Sirach's been working in, and so he has to enter through the AR glasses or something like that as well, and so that could maybe explain some of the timelines, but they've given us no indications of that yet. Granted, they do tend to leave some of those reveals for a little bit later.
True.
But there's only 2 episodes left.
Right.
So I'm starting to come back to the conclusion that we have seen the real world, that Sirach is probably real, and that he is on this plane and inserting himself in these different kind of virtual worlds that Dolores, Charlotte, Maeve is in. They might not all be connected, but I feel more after this episode that we are seeing things outside of a simulation. I just can't piece together which parts are that and which parts aren't, because if you can't tell, does it matter?
At the end of the day, if you can't tell, does it matter? That's a really good point, and probably, honestly, the biggest theme for William freeing himself of his sins, like his arc in this episode.
Well, and not just William. I mean, we've seen it this season from Caleb, from Dolores, from Charlotte, that they're all kind of questioning. They're all kind of questioning how much choice they really have.
And they all kind of come to different answers to the question, if you can't tell, does it matter? Some of them, like Caleb, answer vehemently yes.
Right.
And we don't know how William is answering that, because while kind of earlier I said that he poses the question, if you can't tell, does it matter? And, is he saying that just to kind of throw his jailers off of the scent? At the very end of the day, that's a question. That's not an answer. So he's saying, if you can't tell, does it matter? He's not saying it doesn't matter. He's asking if it does.
Oh, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way.
I hadn't either until literally right now, and I'm like, boom, mind blown. So that will bring us into Charlotte escapes from Delos. This is honestly probably a more kind of linear, and it's honestly a less interesting plot line to me, because it is more just kind of like action packed, here it goes. Interesting in a theory kind of perspective. Fun to watch, interesting to watch. Yes. Absolutely. And I think that particularly the very end of this will kind of set the stage for a really interesting final 2 episodes. So let's dive in. Mm-hmm. So Charlotte drops her son off with her ex-husband and goes into Delos. she is going to take Delos private. She talks with her partner in crime, who is kind of introduced briefly in this episode. He's like another board member who, with their votes together, they have the votes and the ability to take Delos private. And he is promptly assassinated by Sirach's goons in broad daylight. They give her a phone, and she actually even talks with Sirach like right there. It's like, oh yeah, I'm coming. This guy was planning to take it private, so like I ended it. She's like, you did it in broad daylight. What the heck? And he's like, yeah, I mean, Dolores is doing all of these things, makes it to where we can get away with a lot of stuff we couldn't otherwise. You look like you wanted to say something.
No, it just further confuses the real versus not real. Like,
agreed.
He's so cold, but at the same time, we've had moments of empathy from him or towards him. So, still not sure what to think of Sirach.
Hard agree. So Sirach / Insight, Sirach arrives, and they've bought out Delos. Earlier, whenever I was like, I'm not sure what the 4 bodies are for, this is something I didn't think of before, but he orders 3 assets transferred and the destruction of all else. So there were four bodies there, right? One of them was Maeve. Obviously, she doesn't need to be transferred. One of them, presumably Hector, he did need to be transferred. They did need to acquire that asset. The Lee Sizemore, the thing, like projection that they made in the thing didn't need to be transferred because Sirach already had that one. The Connell's pearl didn't need to be transferred because they got that from whenever Connell's blew himself up. So what are those other 2 assets? Were those other assets the pearls? Was it perhaps the production of the bodies themselves? Asset is a rather broad term. I just saw that on there and was like, I wonder what that actually is now.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. They didn't really go into what they were, and you kind of believe that it was the bodies, or that's how we were led to believe, because they went and then they found Hector, but that's a great point. I don't think we found out. Maybe that's what was when Maeve shows up that her body is complete and they have the other 2. I think we were expecting to see what those are next time, or in the final episode, because they tend to go alternating episodes this time of whose story we're talking about.
Right.
You got me noodling now. I hadn't even considered that it's something other than the bodies.
Until I reached that point, I wasn't either, honestly. So, something to think about while we go through the action-packed escape of Charlotte from Delos. So Charlotte kind of goes into the data area. She downloads like all of the host data, and one of Sirach's goons kind of like comes over and is like, "Oh, he told us to get rid of all this," and she's like, "Oh, he'll thank me later." And he's like, "I'm gonna tell him," and he stalks off to go and tattle on her for breaking the rules, and she kills him in cold blood, like she does. In the kind of download of information area, she finds William's genetic tag, because she planted the code stuff in him whenever she put him into the insane asylum. That's not the right word, but into the facility.
Rehabilitation facility.
Yes, rehabilitation facility. She, pricked his neck with like a little pokey bit that was popping out of her finger. So that we now have a word for that. That's genetic tag with planted code. finds out where William is, and he's in that place in Mexico, which might mean that he and Bernard have already kind of absconded, and that's one of the reasons why they need to find him. It might also not. We're not exactly sure. And they find out that Serac has Connell's pearl. She grabs her belongings from her room and calls to check in on her ex-husband and son. All these things are kind of important little side things, but it's much more just kind of a recitation for a lot of Charlotte's escape. Like I said, it's much less kind of thematically interesting until we get kind of towards the end. So Serac pulls Charlotte into a board meeting and calls her out as being Dolores. And the kind of real giveaway that Serac cites as to why and how he knew that she wasn't actually Charlotte was that the real Charlotte would never have checked in on her son in the middle of all of this nonsense. And it's that's crazy.
Right. And he even makes a comment that he thinks it's weird that the alternate version, the host version, would have more human traits or humanity than the real person. And so it further blends what's real and maybe makes you think, well, if you can't tell what's real and what's not, then does it make a difference as long as somebody is good, or if you can tell that they're evil, then does it matter if you extinguish them? So it again just goes back to identity, I think, and being able to identify what's real and what's not, but then make you question, even if it's not real, can it still be good?
Well, and not only that, but I also kind of have to wonder how much of a grasp Serac really has on Charlotte. Because whenever Charlotte was about to die, what's the one thing she does? She records something for her son, on basically her deathbed. She may have been more able-bodied than most people on their deathbed, but she knows she's about to die, and the one thing she does is record something for her son. So, is that really actually a giveaway? Is this kind of Serac kind of citing something to make Dolores Charlotte, kind of question her humanity? Or was he just wrong about her, about Charlotte's kind of the profile to begin with? I don't know. So,
well, that's interesting, because when you put it like that, because the timelines are so confusing, this could be the second time that he's seen her make this callback, and maybe the first time she was also a host.
And see, I only don't think so because of what happens at the end of this episode, where it's pretty clear that her ex-husband and son are pretty dead, right?
Well, we don't see them.
That's true. Unless you see it happen. And sometimes when you do, they very well right? Could not be dead. Presumably, though, they are dead. And so that's kind of what makes me think that the kind of call that we see is probably the quote-unquote real Charlotte. But if we can't tell, does it matter? I think it does,
actually. Call this one. We'll have to call this one, Does It Matter?
Right. So, whenever Serac calls Charlotte out as being Dolores, she reveals that she's bled Delos dry, gutting out of its data, money, and resources, and she's already sent that all out. He kind of calls her bluff and is like, hey, you haven't sent that all out yet. I've been watching you, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think that she had the opportunity to upload it anywhere, but she did download everything. So,
and I don't think he cares about the money.
No,
because I mean, he takes over this company and presumably just makes over the 50% of voting shares. and then wants to destroy $1 trillion worth of assets. I think that the rest of the shareholders, the other 50%, are selling, and
Right.
it's probably being short sold really heavily at the moment, and it's losing all of its money.
Absolutely. Yeah, because he's taking the 3 assets that he wanted and destroying the rest. And yeah, he doesn't really care about the money part of it. The data, however, is what he's really after.
Really just the one data.
Yeah, only that one data set,
point.
which he doesn't have the encryption key for.
Right.
So Charlotte has like this little like gas thing in her purse that kind of subdues, probably kills everyone kind of sitting around the table at the board. Except for Sirach, he's still standing there. She pulls out her gun and shooty McBang bangs him right in the face. And he's a hologram.
Which she should have assumed, because he didn't get affected by the gas.
Right.
So unless she was thinking he was host and would survive just like her.
True. In which case, shooting him where she did would have punctured his pearl and would have been that real death. So this is the part where I was saying before that makes me think that Sirach might be not necessarily not real, but he might be Rehoboam, because in an earlier episode, we kind of had this discussion on like what was kind of real and what wasn't, and how because whenever Connells was in the room in like an insight facility, he wasn't wearing AR glasses, and Sirach was only a hologram whenever Connells blew himself up. That was an insight facility. They very well could have had some sort of AR technology, hologram projection stuff in the room. This is in Delos, which, yes, was just bought by Insight, but it didn't already have all of that infrastructure in place. So whereas the Insight facility one doesn't kind of send off a red flag to me, that in conjunction with this one where he's shot through the head, but it's not an Insight facility, so it doesn't presumably have that like hologram stuff built in for Sirach's purposes. This has me even more going, this is definitely not the quote unquote real world. This is a simulation. Because how else would Sirach be able to do that in a facility that he, until like right before this, didn't control?
Interesting. Good point. I everything seems so detailed that they add so much subtlety that you start to expect that everything fits together. But in season 2 especially, then we saw that sometimes they put things in that you paid too much attention to. True. And then it wasn't that didn't turn out to be anything. I kind of wonder if maybe the glasses are something that they had the idea for, and then for whatever reason missed having it. But
that's possible.
I agree. It's a big enough thing that what was her name took the glasses from Liam, that William had to wear the glasses to see his alternate reality, that they had to put him on to see him. It seems like it's important enough in other scenes that it shouldn't be something that they would miss. So that's a great point, that this must not be the real world. I'm not sure though how, but the confusing thing is, in this world, presumably we've seen this world before and they have had to use the glasses. So I'm really confused.
Yeah, and it's almost like the glasses are an element in this world, but Sirach, that's kind of why I'm thinking that Sirach is kind of like the architect in the Matrix series, right? He's that kind of that before. Yeah. So he's kind of that kind of guy in the chair whether he's real or Rehoboam or kind of what his identity is. He's kind of the one calling the shots, right? So whenever he gets shot through the head, it's like, well, that just can't happen. Like, he can't just die. Why he doesn't, just pretend to have died, like, Agent Smith style. Oh, well, you killed that one. Doesn't matter. I am multitudes. Like, I have another body, because it's all just a simulation. I'm not sure.
Good point. Yeah, it seems like it would be a lot easier for him if they thought he was dead.
Right? If they think I'm dead, they can go off and do whatever they want, and I can just Deus Ex Machina that shit.
Yep.
So Charlotte then begins shooting her way out of the boardroom. She has a confrontation in the elevator where the guard gets the notice that she's the priority number one, stop her at all cost. She arrives to where
not all costs.
Not at all costs. True. Very, very, very good determination. Not at all costs. They want her alive. So she arrives where the host bodies are being built, kills Hector, smushes his pearl. Yeah.
I expected it to be crunchier and not gooey.
Yeah, honestly, same. Like, I expected it to be more just like straight up mechanical rather than biomechanical. At the very least, biomechanical looking, right?
Right.
So Maeve then, of course, lets out her primal scream, and like real world, the world that Charlotte's in, not real world, not necessarily real world. The world that Charlotte's in is interacted with by that said primal scream. She goes to kind of confront, kill Maeve's Pearl, but Sirach's goons come in, basically force her to retreat at that point. She keeps on shooting her way out and is eventually like stopped by him. She gets kind of wounded in the side, and that's when they say he wants her alive, which is news to me.
We could understand why he would want that. If he understands that she is Dolores, then it's another point, because he wasn't getting what he wanted out of the Connell's pearl, but True. He might get it from Charlotte because she was working much closer.
True. And since Rehoboam can't predict the host kind of movement and whatnot, he doesn't necessarily know, and honestly we don't, if this version of Dolores has the encryption key. So that makes a lot of sense why he would want her alive if he desperately needs that encryption key to get the data that he so very much desires.
Right. I'm still curious why that's so important to him. I mean, he's explained it as needing it as the final piece to truly understand humanity, that it's the code or the mind map of all humanity. But our understanding is that it's really just those that escaped to the land beyond.
Right.
Does that really complete the picture? It seems like you'd still have the anomalies. So to me, there's a deeper reason that he wants that. And maybe it's related to his brother or William.
It seemed like to me, and I'm going to come back to what you just said, because I think that might actually be it. And I didn't think about it until you said that. So what I think essentially happened is whenever Dolores shot the Valley Beyond data to wherever she shot it off to, it also included the kind of like the guest data as well. So it's kind of like an accumulation of a lot of guest data as well, and that was kind of destroyed in the whenever they flooded the forge, right? What might be a lot more interesting and might be an answer is what guest data might have been there.
Right. Did
his brother visit? Did Sirach visit? If we're assuming that Rehoboam is slash Sirach is actually his brother, did Sirach himself actually visit? And that would be kind of a way of bringing him back. What particular guest's data might he be after that would make this such a priority? And he's like pulling out all the stops to try and get at that data.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that might actually be a little bit more what the actual answer is to that, because otherwise, like he's bought Delos, he can, you know, get the hat technology to find out, you know, more about people who are still alive. But the only thing that he can't have access, that he wouldn't have access to from this, that he would need that encryption key for, is a specific guest's data. And that's the only thing I can think of that is that real thing that he's chasing. And I didn't.
That started me down a different path that maybe I'll have to think on a little bit more. I forgot about the hat technology, and so, yeah, we'll come back with another theory next week based off of that.
Excellent. Well, and the hat technology, by buying Delos, he's got it. The kind of being able to map out the mind, by buying Delos, he's got it.
Right. So kind of where that triggered was this season we're questioning whether you have choices or not.
Right.
With the Delos hats, right? When you went to the parks, then you got to choose whether you had a white hat or a black hat, and then you go down that path, right?
Right.
We were led to believe that the hats then just collected the data so that they had all the information on the guests. But because you're making the choice of which hat you have, and everyone that takes the black hat goes down the black hat path, everybody who takes the white hat goes down the white hat path. Was that really the choice and it's collecting, or was it a two-way street where it's collecting the data? Sure. But it's also wiring your brain towards that path. And then if that's the case, then any of those anomalies in the park that may have had a white hat and went down the black hat path, like William,
right,
or vice versa, would be the host that he would be interested in understanding, so that he could take that data of how they changed, why they didn't interact with the hat, to fix whatever rehabilitation plan he had for the outliers in Rehoboam.
I really like that theory because it takes an aesthetic, like thematic thing that has been in the series since the very first season, you know, which hat you picked, kind of delineating what your storyline is, and takes it from it's a thematic thing to, oh no, the hat itself is what's kind of more influencing that. And honestly, that kind of hat technology, if this is actually a thing, might have a bigger kind of meld into what he's trying to do. Because if what he's trying to do is to fix the outliers, if he's got that hat technology, he can do that to a varying degree of success, but a pretty high degree of success at that.
Right.
So that's a really significant possibility as well, and may in fact be one of the three bits of assets. One of the three assets that he's trying to take, because assets is a broad thing and does not need to necessarily be the pearls that, you know, obviously the Hector pearl was. That could be interesting.
And he might be using something similar in the glasses.
True.
As we go back to assets, it's similar contact points. You'd have the points at the temples touching to input, output the information that you want. Maybe the hats were a little bit more perfect version of that. And interesting.
Yeah, very much so. So Charlotte is, of course, wounded, and they say that they want her out alive. So she calls the right control robot that we saw in, I think it was episode 1, where she maybe it was episode 2, an earlier episode where she's accepting the right control robot, and boy does it pay off. It Deus Ex Machinas her right out of Delos. So
right.
She's still kind of like hobbling along because she is in fact wounded, and but she largely escapes. She makes it home and escorts her ex and son into the car so that they can make their escape. She like pacifies her son. He's like, I'm scared. She's like, don't worry, I can keep you safe. Oh,
or trust me.
Yeah.
She hands him an elephant, which
it's a
I don't know.
Really good callback.
Keep going back to that. Yeah, the callback to him asking and her telling him that there's no elephants, and also then back again makes you think of William's daughter saying that she loved the elephants too. So it gives them a point where they can
kind of bond.
Yeah, because I feel like that's where this is going now. That as bad things happen and the car goes boom, and Charlotte's already told Dolores that she feels like their paths are diverging enough that she's questioning, and she's obviously concerned about her family, but Dolores tells her that they're not your family, as a reminder that she's owned by Dolores. I kind of feel like this is then setting up that conflict between Charlotte and Dolores, or Dolores and herself, which then ties back into William confronting all of his past. Now we see Dolores is also potentially going to have to deal with hers, especially as well since Connells is captured by Serac, potentially being reprogrammed.
Right.
Although Charlotte has that now, right? So
true.
We'll see. We'll see.
And so whenever
I don't know how they're going to wrap this up in 2 episodes. So.
I don't either. And whenever the car kind of goes boom, and Charlotte kind of crawls out, she did in fact have the Connells pearl, but she's like extra crispy at this point. Is that pearl still intact? Because like her body is like literally on fire for quite a bit of that.
That's true. That's a good question. A lot of unanswered questions of what happened to the things that were in that car, or even if she had the pearl with her in that car.
True.
There could have been a stop-off point at some point.
One of, I think, the main themes so far that we've seen from Charlotte in particular is found family, right? She is hyper protective of the son, which, as Dolores and Serac continually remind her, are not her family. But she found that family, and she's like actively like that is now her family. That found family theme is one that's always really resonant to me, and I always really like. So kind of seeing that here with Charlotte, where it's like she found her family and Dolores is not that family, I think will kind of, like you said, have a payoff here in the next couple episodes.
And that is also a nice overlap with Maeve. Maeve finding her family and identifying that way, despite having very vague memories of it.
Very much so. Yeah, I think they have like season 1 Maeve and Charlotte in season 3 seem to have a very similar thematic arcs.
Yeah. Which is one of the reasons I really like season 3 is there are a lot of callbacks to season 1, which I still am partial to season 1. It was just so amazing.
It was.
Season 3 seems to be bringing back a lot of that magic, and a lot of that is through those kind of callbacks.
And they're so earned too. Oh, I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So, like we said, Charlotte kind of crawls out from the smoldering ruins of the car. She's on fire. She's extra crispy. She's got her like hair has all burned away, and she's just kind of like gazing depressingly at the just decimated like shell of the car. And that's kind of why I think that that her ex and her son were still in there, because she was definitely affected by it.
Oh yeah.
At the very end of it, I say, like a phoenix from the like a phoenix from the ashes, she will prevail. That's just my editorialization. I obviously don't know that.
With 2 episodes to go, there's a lot still to uncover and map back together. So I think you're right that she will prevail. Just not sure which she, Dolores or Charlotte.
That's a very good point. And I have a feeling that we're going to see a lot more of Man in Black Dolores next episode. Whether she's actually Man in Black.
You're probably right. I think we do have to swing back to the Caleb story, which includes that Man in Black Dolores, or what we're assuming is the Man in Black Dolores.
Right.
We could just be misreading things there. I don't know that we'll really get the connection to William until the final episode, because I think that's the big reveal that they've hidden throughout and given us those hints. That I feel like that's what their big reveal on the final season will be. So I'm not sure where they really go with that. Maybe a Maeve and Caleb interaction to at least get those characters resolved together, right? Because they've been largely separated, and we need some of that conflict still.
Absolutely, and that's some of the conflict that was like teased in the like trailers and stuff. Like at the very beginning, I thought we were going to get that like immediately.
Right, I did too. I mean, we have that it's coming. It's kind of been coming for a while. I really expected that we'd see some of that in this one, and we kind of do, because Charlotte, does interact, at least in the virtual world, with Maeve by killing Hector, and you see Dolores, the Connell's Dolores, in Dolores form, butting heads, and they're talking to each other at least, but you still didn't get that epic conflict that you expect when those behemoths clash.
Exactly. Well, and that's something that was, like we said, was teased like from the very beginning, like so much so that like Maeve has her like samurai sword, and like she's having that exchange with Dolores, like in those like preview those trailers. And is that just like a kind of red herring, or is that something that's coming like in the final 2 episodes?
Yeah, it has to be coming. It has to,
right? Yeah, I think it has to too.
And part of the reason it has to, as we go into the final thoughts here, is they didn't announce, or they didn't, I don't think they finalized the contract for season 4 until recently. They just announced it this week. So you feel like each of these seasons is meant to be a complete loop that builds off of each other. But we do have a season 4 coming, which is really exciting, and up to 6 seasons. So
ooh, I didn't see that part of it.
So it's after every season, then they are going to reevaluate. But but yeah, now that there's officially a 4th season, it's really going to be interesting as they wrap this up, where they can go from here. We kind of talked early in the in Electric Grumpy World about this not being the real world, and
Right.
that season 4 would kind of be what we would expect to be the series finale, where things do finally bubble into the real world. But now knowing that we definitely have a 4th season, that's definitely a possibility, but that it could be going up to 6 seasons. It'll be really interesting to see if we get a reveal to the real world, because I don't think they could do 3 seasons in the real world.
Yeah, I don't think they could either. And the increasing escalation,
Right.
kind of the zoom out, zoom out, zoom out, zoom out, kind of
Right.
expanding of the world, I think is a trajectory that, especially if they kind of have a timeline for 6 seasons, we could see implement in a really cool way. And this season 3 being that diverging path where they introduce those kind of I was about to say not synthetic, but those false realities, those digital realities. I think that is definitely something that is going to bear fruit like whoa in the coming seasons.
They've definitely done a good job of setting up and doing world building in this season. So hats off to them. Has me really excited for the future of the series.
Hard same. So thank you all for joining us this episode of Electric Grumpy World. Of course, my amazing co-host is Guy Grumpy. You can find him on the internet pretty much everywhere at GuyGrumpy. That's twitch.tv/GuyGrumpy and on Twitter at GuyGrumpy. I have been Electric Sheep City. I can be found places that have the full text, like length of Electric Sheep City at Electric Sheep City. The places that don't, like Twitter, I'm at eSheepCity. Please definitely drop us a line on our Discord as well. We've got an Electric Grumpy World channel in there, and we would love to talk about theories with any of y'all who might be interested in that forum as well. I would love to bring some of those onto our show if anyone is so inclined to talk with us there as well. Grumpy, is there anything that I'm forgetting at this point? There are a couple things. One of them is that our intro and outro songs are brought to you by Shadeswiper, who is at Shadeswiper on Twitter. And our amazing art is done by Riraru, who is Riraru on Twitter. Grumpy, now is there anything that I'm forgetting?
No, I think you've got us all covered. Thanks so much, Electric Sheep City. Excited to see the new episode tomorrow. And we'll be back on Saturdays, so for the next couple of weeks. Probably a little bit later, though. Today was 9 o'clock. We'll be doing 10 o'clock Pacific time on future Saturdays.
Absolutely. And Guy Grumpy, I don't know what I would do without you here co-hosting with me. I want to give you a special thanks today, in particular, for joining me. Thank you, Grumpy.
Thank you, sir.
I hope y'all stay electric and you stay grumpy, world.